All right, it's my great pleasure to invite Sarah Eckhart up. Yeah, give her a round of applause. That's right. So, Salas is super excited. His mom is up here. So you all know we've been having, every once in a while, we bring someone up from our family to share about who they are in the world, in their workplace, what they do, and kind of what spirituality brings to bear in that particular arena. And so we are really glad to have this gifted sister here, wife and mother, and we're going to hear a little bit about her work. So tell us first, kind of where you work, what you do, and what is a curator, because I don't know what that means.
Sure. Okay, so I work at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. I'm a curator of modern and contemporary art. We call it an encyclopedic collection. So we have art at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts from ancient to African, East Asian, Southeast Asian, American, European, all the way up through the 21st century. And so my area is 1900 kind of forward. And, what do curators do? There's a lot in that question. So we have this collection. Curators choose the art that goes up on the walls. We interpret it, so we write the labels. We teach about it, and we hopefully go out and look for new works that we add to the collection.
And because I got to prepare for this, I know that you have a really cool way of looking at culture through the eyes of art. Will you tell us a little bit about kind of what your theory behind art is and how we as people of God should look at it and interact with it and know about it?
Okay. Well, I don't know how prepared I am to answer. It's a huge question that people ask me, and actually Corey, when he asked me, he had some grand things to say about art, and I was kind of shooting that down. Just because I think that, in fact, people almost get intimidated by art because they think of it as something so lofty and so separate or apart from who they are. And I think he might have even said something about art being redemptive. And so I was kind of responding that and saying, well, first of all, art is made by humans, and humans are sinners. So it's not, I don't think we should think of it as something that is innately somehow lofty or has some kind of power in it. But that said, I think that our God is a redeemer, and when he wants to redeem something and use it for his purposes, he can use it for his purposes. So I think there are times when he uses art, just like he uses everything in our lives, in everybody's lives. Trying to think what else. And the other way that I talked about it, I guess, was thinking about it as also visual culture. That when people say art, sometimes it's hard to know what we mean by art. And when I think of visual culture, I try to explain it as just the way that we see, and that we kind of think that we just know how to see, but in fact, our culture trains us how to see and kind of trains us what to look at and how we see things. So the way that I think about my job, I guess, in a sense, is to explain to people that these are objects that emerged. They're made by a person, but they emerge from a culture at a certain time. And one of the things about the art museum, most art museums in the West, actually, are that they come to represent quite often just one dominant culture. So a lot of the art on our walls was made by white men, at least in the American and the modern contemporary collection. So one of the things that I feel passionate about at the museum is increasing the number of cultures that we represent on our walls, increasing the number of works by women and by African Americans in particular, and thinking specifically about our context here and what those pieces of works might do for the audience here.
And speaking of, you have a very interesting collection and show coming up that I think our folks would be really interested in hearing about. So would you briefly take us through a couple slides?
Yeah, I threw in a few more than a couple, so I'm going to try to keep saying forward. We have the opportunity to take an exhibition called Posing Beauty, which is curated by Dr. Deborah Willis, who's in New York, chair of photography at New York University. But most of all, the sort of most renowned scholar of African American photography, or the history of African American photography. And just as the museum in large may be missing important cultural perspectives, the history of photography, by and large, the mainstream history of photography has left out most African American photographers. So she is the woman who put together the most comprehensive history of African American photography. So I was excited. Her exhibition was coming through, but she's dealing with something in particular within that history. She's thinking about beauty, which was something very personal to her. She actually grew up her mother was a beautician, but she was thinking about the power of beauty and whose images in our mainstream culture get promoted as beautiful and whose get left out, and how do we define beauty. And so this exhibition puts together this enormous range. It's really about the multiplicity of beauty, and it's images of old people, young people, celebrities, ordinary people on the street, just men, women. So it's just a kind of multiplicity of images. And then I'll go through the slides, and then I curated an exhibition from our own collection to kind of pair with it. So we'll go forward. Just to give you a sample of images, this is a photograph of Susan Taylor, who was a model at the time, but also the editor of Essence magazine for 20 years. This is just a great image of somebody taking an image, and the title is Posing Beauty, because one of her questions is a question about who's in control of images when they get taken, and how do we perceive ourselves, and how do we show ourselves to the world around us. This is a African-American studio photographer who's just taking images on the street around him, and I think that's also another kind of theme throughout the exhibition, the idea of community photographers who are just documenting the community around them. This was Jamal Shabazz, who's Brooklyn-based, and when he asked this guy, he wanted to take his photograph, he wanted him to showcase his shoes. Anyway, this is one of my favorite images because this is Richmond. This is the only image in the exhibition that comes from Richmond, and Robert H. McNeil, in 1938, during the Depression, was given an assignment to come to Virginia to take the photographs for a history book called The History of the Negro in Virginia, and this was one of the maybe about 100 images that he took for that project. And it looks like Richmond, but it looks like Churchill, I think, but it's actually the South Side. Okay, and then Identity Shifts was an exhibition I curated. I pulled works from our own collection to speak to some of these larger themes that were coming out of Posing Beauty, but really about, I called it Identity Shifts because I also wanted to think about the fact that identity is really not stable. There are a lot of things that inform identity, and in particular a number of 21st century artists who were thinking about just how multidimensional identity is. And there's a little bit of a generational shift too. Some of the kind of artists who influenced them in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, but then really a number of artists working now. So this is just a classic piece from the collection that a lot of people love by Faith Ringgold called Tar Beach. It's painted on a quilt, and it's the story of a little girl called Cassie Louise Lightfoot, who is flying over her city and kind of taking into herself the things that she loves and wants to aspire to, and there's a children's book that goes with it. And this is a Houston-based artist named Rob Pruitt, and he talks a lot about how he thinks our notion of Black identity is very limited, and so he does this series of women in which he takes different objects from different cultures and kind of puts together things you wouldn't normally expect to see together. So this is a Mesoamerican steeped pyramid made out of an afro, and he will be here if you think that if that's intriguing to you. He will actually be speaking on July 17th with possibly, let me see the next slide. Yes, with Sonia Clark, who is based here in Richmond, and they are going to be talking in particular about hair and cultural identity. Sonia Clark has worked for 20 years with hair as one of her main themes, and she thinks that hair kind of stands in for the whole person and how much it has to do with how we communicate who we are culturally. This is a really complicated and powerful work, when she moved here in about 2008, 2009 from Washington, D.C., and she describes this as she was thinking about what it was like to be a Black woman from the North who was moving to the South, and she was negotiating things like seeing the Confederate flag. I think our governor had declared April the Confederate History Month and hadn't talked about emancipation or the history of slavery. And so she painted a canvas like a Confederate flag, and then she actually wove black thread through in the shape of cornrows and Bantu knots in the shape of the American flag to think about how these histories coincide and how layered they are and how they're sort of bound together. Next one. This is Hank Willis Thomas, who, these are photographs. He was looking at a photograph from the 19th century, a minstrel figure, and thinking about how race gets performed. But in fact, when you look at this in person, you can never see it completely in focus. He's put this film over each piece. You move in front of it, and it comes in and out of focus. So there's this whole larger metaphor of how identity shifts and how hard it is to kind of bring that dialogue or conversation into focus. And then this is a photographer, Louis Draper, who was born and raised here in Richmond and then moved to New York in the 1950s and formed the first African-American photography collective called Kamoinga, and whose story really had gone untold both in New York and here until just a few years ago. His sister brought his work to my attention, and I was really excited he had this large body of work, to acquire that for the museum. And so the next 3 slides are images he took in the 1970s in Brooklyn. And then last, I'm trying to speed through, Signs of Protest is another separate exhibition in our photography hallway at the museum that that is a small exhibition. It's about 24 photographs, but through those photographs, I was able to tell the story of the civil rights movement from the late 50s through to the early 1970s. And all of those works, this is one of the blessings, I think, of my job. All of those works are pieces that I've been able to acquire in the last couple of years, and the museum has been very supportive of the idea that we needed to be able to represent the civil rights within our collection. So this is a portrait of Stokely Carmichael, and last, we have a whole portfolio of the last year of Martin Luther King's life, which is really powerful. You get a sense of him speaking, and then this image, a sense of his vulnerability. And I think that pretty much, so come to the museum, you can see it in person. I should say a few things, dates, I guess. April, all 3 exhibitions are open now. They closed July 27th. And then the biggest program I would love to see the museum at is Family Day on June 21. The exhibition will be free. It's normally $10, but will be free on June 21. And I would just love to see people from my neighborhood at the museum.
Yay. Thank you so much, Sarah. Murray, come on up.
Thanks, Lawson. Thanks, Sarah. That was great. Great to learn more about your work there. And we have already said it's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day. And if you see moms, please do so. Let them know. Congratulate them and everything. Celebrate that. And I actually have a poem here that it's kind of like a poem I'm going to read that thanks to Paul Granger, he sent it to me. I want to share it, but because we want to honor motherhood, but we also want to be aware of the complexities of the concept of motherhood, and I think this actually does a really good job of explaining that. And then Beth and Leslie are going to come up in a second and share some things as well. And the only critique I have of this poem is that it has a horrible blue background, and so I'm going to try to read it the best I can. So, to those who gave birth this year to their first child, we celebrate with you. To those who lost a child, we mourn with you. To those who are in the trenches with little ones every day and wear the badge of food stains, we appreciate you. To those who experience loss through miscarriages, failed adoptions, or running away, we mourn with you. To those who walk the hard path of infertility, fraught with pokes, prods, tears, and disappointment, we walk with you. Forgive us when we say foolish things. We don't mean to make this harder than it is. To those who are foster moms, mentor moms, and spiritual moms, we need you. To those who have warm and close relationships with your children, we celebrate with you. To those who have disappointment, heartache, and distance with your children, we sit with you. To those who lost their mothers this year, we grieve with you. To those who experienced abuse at the hands of your own mother, we acknowledge your experience. To those who lived through driving tests, medical tests, and the overall testing of motherhood, we are better for having you in our midst. To those who are single and long to be married and mothering your own children, we mourn that life has not turned out the way you longed for it to be. To those who step-parent, we walk with you on these complex paths. To those who envisioned lavishing love on grandchildren, yet that dream is not to be, we grieve with you. To those who will have empty nests in the upcoming year, we grieve and rejoice with you. To those who place children up for adoption, we commend you for your selflessness and remember how you hold that child in your heart. And to those who are pregnant with new life, both expected and surprising, we anticipate with you. This Mother's Day, we walk with you. Mothering is not for the faint of heart, and we have real warriors in our midst. We remember you. I thought it just expressed really well just the complexities of motherhood while giving honor to all the different aspects of that. And I'll just share one other quick thing in thinking about Mother's Day. And it's kind of a little bit of a comical story of Lauren and me, but helps tease out some other points. And that is, we have sort of a marriage covenant with all these different categories that we talk about every year. And one of the categories, and sort of come to agreement upon, hopefully, one of the categories is discipleship. And so we actually had like lists of people that are discipling us, or sort of like Barnabas partners that were, discipling each other, or younger people that we might be discipling, that sort of thing. And my list was pretty healthy and felt pretty good about it. And her list was a lot shorter, and she felt discouraged by that. And then another day, sort of recently after that time, I was sitting with one of my mentors actually, and we were talking about that topic, and he just very quickly was like, well, she's got those two boys. At the time it was the two boys. She's got those two boys that she's discipling. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess you could say that. And it was just kind of funny. I had never used the term discipleship. I just used the term like sort of raising kids. That's very important, but that she's actually discipling our boys as well, which is so sort of logical and straightforward. I feel embarrassed to think that I didn't really see it that way. But I want to say that just to point out, how important motherhood is, even in that sense that it's not just raising kids, which is important enough, but that you're raising disciples of Christ. Of course, that's all in God's hands, but you play such an important role. But then also why that's important is because even in not being a biological parent or mother, you play into that as well. And I even know young women, teenage girls, who are discipling younger children, and that's such a beautiful and powerful and important thing, and connects with this concept of motherhood. So happy Mother's Day, and just pray for all of you out there in your different spheres of life and how you connect with the concept of motherhood. And now Leslie and Beth would like to share a couple things, so we'll have them. I think Leslie's first. Yeah, so give it up for Leslie.
Well, as Murray was sharing, there are a lot of different ways to enter into motherhood, and mine was not a physical one. When I married Boyd, he had two little boys who were 7 and 9, and they became mine to mother. I had been single with a job and with all the kind of feedback and contact that entails, and conversations with adults daily, and a social life with them. And then I got married, and we moved into a little cottage in the country on a 750-acre tree farm. We were on a telephone exchange called the Farmers and Merchants, and I knew absolutely no one that I could call on that exchange. Everything else was a pay long-distance call. My children's school, my husband at work, where he was teaching at Randolph-Macon, we didn't have a computer, and there was no such thing as the internet anyway. So there was no Facebook. We were going to a wonderful church, which is actually where I met Dan and Susan Boyer. And we had one car, and Boyd used it to go to work. And so there I was, from a life where I had been around lots of people to all by myself on a 750-acre tree farm. We were very, very financially stressed because we had a house in North Carolina that we were still paying the mortgage on. Are you ready for this? Mortgage rates were 17%. 17%, needless to say, houses were not flying off the market at that rate. And it was a confusing time for me. I felt alone a lot of the time. Thankfully, my husband had told me that I should read the Bible. Now, I know that right now, if you are mothering small children, you are thinking, I could do with a day by myself on a 750-acre tree farm. And you don't have time to sit and read the Bible like I did. But it wasn't the quantity. A lot of times, no matter how much I read, it would be like maybe one verse that would stick with me. It might be one verse that stuck with me for a week. I cannot say, in all honesty, that I ever came to be completely comfortable and completely fulfilled in that kind of isolation. But I look back on that time, and I would not trade it for anything in the world, because the Lord taught me two really important things. One is that constantly being praised or fortified and having constant company of people can become an addiction and a form of idolatry. And the other thing that I found out is that the greatest expressions of love come in private. And that's true of the Lord as well. Those times when I had no one else, nobody to call, nobody to talk to, those are the times when I met him in a way that I don't know how I would have met him in quite the same way. As an extrovert, I would always, I think, have been striving for communication and companionship. But the Lord knew what he was doing. He put me alone on a 750-acre tree farm with no telephone and an internet that hadn't been invented yet. So I just want to encourage those of you who are feeling, for any reason, isolated, depressed, frustrated, unsatisfied, or unfulfilled. This may be your time in the schoolroom with the Lord. This may be your time in that very private chamber with a God who loves you more than you can ever possibly receive, that he loves you. And I say that especially as an encouragement to women who are raising children and find yourselves restricted. To fathers who are experiencing being fathers of young children and who formerly had a lot of freedom and came home to a fun-loving wife who, yes, let's do go out to eat and let's do go see some people, and now is exhausted and wants nothing more from you than to take over the children. Your life has changed too. But there's a joy of it and a wonder of it. And I think one of the verses that is most precious to me from that time is out of Psalm 37. And it says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And what he gives you is himself.
All right. This is not another speaker. I'm a preschool teacher, so I'm like, we had songs, and then we had speaker. It's time for another song. So Matt, glad you're coming up. Y'all can just start the instrumental that leads into the song after dismissal. This is really just community prayer time, but with a motherhood focus. Sweet Corey from his hospital bed said, guys, make sure you recognize that in Mother's Day, like any holiday, it's a time for more rejoicing, but for some, it's also a time of more mourning. Romans 12:15 says to rejoice with those that rejoice and to mourn with those that mourn. So that's what this community prayer time is going to be. Murray and Leslie beautifully honored motherhood and spiritual motherhood, but for some of us who have lost a mother or have lost a child, either in a physical sense or an emotional sense, if they are still living, but for one reason or another, you can't be with them, or that relationship just can't be or hasn't yet been, although it could be, what you long for. We just want a time to pray into those sorrows, because we know that pain and grief is real. As Lawson said with the cycle, when there's death, there is real pain and grief. But we also know that we have a God who is very acquainted with suffering and with sorrow. We know that he promises to be near the brokenhearted. And we know that if we can run to him with our questions, our anger, or our pain, that he can be trusted with that pain, and that he will show up. So also, if one verse for if you have a mother, but it just hasn't been what you've longed for, Isaiah 49:15 says, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have not compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you in the palms of my hands," which clearly is the cross. It's those nails. He says, even if your earthly mother has forgotten you, I will never forget you. So if anyone wants to pray into that, one or two people, or has a prayer request for that wants to share now, go ahead. And if not, I'll just close this time in prayer before we dismiss the children. Any prayer requests? All right. God, we thank you that you say in Psalms 126 that those who go out in weeping will return with songs of joy. God, there is something in the weeping. There is something in, though we feel like turning away or we feel angry or running away from you, when we recognize that you are the only one that can heal that loss, that pain, and we run to you, that you see every tear, that you and that you promise that in that process you will be near us, and that we will return with joy in you, God. Thank you that you are not a high priest that does not know sorrow, but that you are acquainted with suffering and sorrow more than any of us have ever imagined. Lord, be with us today as we continue in a time of prayer and worship. We love you, Jesus. Thank you. And if anyone would like more prayer on that topic one-on-one at the end of the service, I'll be over here. There'll be some prayer stations, and I'll be to the side if you want some one-on-one prayer on that. But now, children who have been so good for your mothers on Mother's Day, so patient and quiet, come on up for dismissal. And someone was very thoughtful and got these little lifesavers so that children can hand out lifesavers to their moms who are lifesavers in the many little and big things in the day. And if you have a spiritual mom or mentor that you want to come get a lifesaver for and give to, you can do that too. Or husbands, give it to wives, or, anyone. Lots of lifesavers, enough for all. So, God, thank you for these children. Thank you that they are a blessing and a heritage from you, that they are like weapons in the arm of a warrior, that you will raise them up to walk in your ways and to know you, God, and be with them in their classes as they go out today. Amen. Thank you. And parents, you can pick them up at 5:30. The service is just going to go on, and people can leave or stay as they wish. But at 5:30, we'll get our kids. 2 and unders are upstairs, and the rest are across the street.